Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 25th edition of the Encounters South African International Documentary Festival. Our industry program kicked off this Saturday in person, and today is the second online session. We will be exploring fashion for futures, exploring the path to a sustainable industry. Climate Story Lab ZA hosts this discussion with the director of Fashion Reimagined, Becky Hutner. The film follows trailblazing designer Amy Powney and her quest for a more ethical and sustainable fashion industry. Joining the discussion about the film's impact campaign are local sustainable fashionistas, textile designer Sibabalwe Ndlwana and Twyg editor Jacky May. This invigorating conversation will consider the stories, ideas, and possibilities that lie within the realm of fashion's future. This event is supported by Climate Story Lab, Southern Africa, and we'd like to thank MIKI REDELINGHUYS for moderating this session. Welcome and thank you all.
Thanks, Taryn. I'm so excited to kick off this conversation. Welcome, Sibabalwe, Jacky, and Becky. So pleased to have you here. So just a little bit about Climate Story Lab. We have partnered with Encounters Film Festival to support films that address the climate crisis. We're so excited that Fashion Reimagined was selected for the Encounters Festival this year. It's also a Climate Story Lab UK alumni. And this really excites us to see films coming through these labs, reaching audiences globally and running incredible impact campaigns, which we're going to talk about today. This is literally a film for everyone who wears clothes. We know you're out there. Welcome, Becky. Becky is a Toronto-born filmmaker who currently lives in England. And I believe this is not your first foray into films about fashion and culture, but this is your first feature. Also, a big welcome to Sibabalwe Ndlwana, who's a sustainable textile designer, and Jacky May, who is almost synonymous with the fashion industry and sustainability in the fashion industry in South Africa. So glad you can join this conversation. I'd like to invite you each to say something about yourself and what brings you to this conversation today, starting off with you, Becky.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Miki, and I'm thrilled to be here and to be showing Fashion Reimagined at Encounters. And thank you everyone for coming to listen to this talk today. So as Miki said, I'm the director of Fashion Reimagined, which is about the environmental impact of the fashion industry through the lens of one British designer called Amy Powney from the brand Mother of Pearl. And I spent 3 years years following her sustainability journey, as she attempted to make her own business more sustainable and ethical, and along the way helped to spark a movement in the UK and become a leader of that movement. Personally, you know, I see the world through a lens of sustainability. I had really a light bulb moment about 10 years ago when I was working as an editor on an environmental documentary called Revolution, which was about the collapse of the oceans and climate change. And that really knocked me sideways, that experience of working on that film. And I've been on kind of my own sustainability journey ever since. And as a filmmaker, I'm very focused on telling stories in the environmental space and putting like a human face to environmental issues. So that's what I'm passionate about, and I'll be speaking a lot more about my filmmaking journey and kind of my impact goals and our strategy and what we've achieved so far, and what we hope to do in the future with this film.
Thanks, Becky. So one of the journeys that we follow in the film is that quest for sustainable fabrics and ethically sourced fabrics. I know that with your weaving, this is something that you're exploring, Sibabalwe. Just briefly introduce us to your work and what it is that you do.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Sibabalwe, and I'm very happy to be here and part of this conversation. I'm a textile designer, researcher, as well as an artist, and my medium is weaving. I say I'm an accidental weaver. I was looking for a bookstore and stumbled across a weaving studio, and took down the numbers, called the studio the following week because it was closed. And once I started classes, I knew that this was the medium for me. And so what was fascinating about that journey was that I had done fashion design before, but had very little experience with what it took to make textiles. And so there was a lot of resonance in this film. And I work with a lot of natural dyeing and locally made yarns. And so, yeah, that's a bit of what I do.
Thanks, Sibabalwe. Jacky, you and I have had so many conversations about saying no to plastic bags and no to non-sustainably sourced items across the board, whether it's food or clothing. Maybe just introduce us to Twyg and what you're trying to do through this initiative, which is much bigger than one single thing.
So thank you, everybody. Can you hear me? You can hear me. I am a journalist, and my last formal job was working for a fashion magazine, and I had never really thought about fashion much before that. I haven't been writing about the arts and culture before that. And fashion really kind of piqued my interest, and I think I was particularly interested in whole farm to fiber journey, which I'm even more interested in at the moment. And the disappointment of working for a fashion magazine which had no interest in the sustainability of fashion or our lives kind of led me to think that I could have a very successful career. So I launched trade thinking, this is easy. Everybody will give us money to do this. But obviously that's not the case. But we still do what we do because we really determined to persuade people to do things more sustainably, whether that's in their own home or getting to work, or more particularly with what you wear and how you make clothes. So I'm so delighted to be on this panel with you, Becky, and really wonderful. At the moment, I'm doing writing up my MPhil research on cotton growing in South Africa, and I'm just coming back from a wool festival in the middle of our Peru, which is a semi-desert area. A celebration of the wonderful wool industry we have. In South Africa, we don't have any organic cotton, we don't grow any cotton. So your movie was
Thanks, Jacky. Okay, so before I hand over to Becky to talk us through some of her journey as well as her impact campaign, I just want to rewind and talk a little bit about the climate crisis and our response to this. And often when we hear the word crisis, we kind of shut down. There's a fright or flight response, but of course that's going to get us nowhere. And when we hear the word crisis along with climate, sometimes the problem seems too big for me or you to make a difference. I'm not a mining conglomerate. I'm not extracting fossil fuels. Of course, we realize that what we need is systemic change to address this issue, but there is a certain amount of agency in being able to make daily choices that adds little drops in the bucket of addressing the crisis. And I think that few of us may be aware of the impact of that fashion has on the climate. And certainly once we've seen this film, we are aware. But what's interesting about the film is you take a very granular journey with one particular design team, the Mother of Pearl team, as they try and make better choices to shift the industry. And I find this very inspiring. Maybe you want to take us a little bit through the road you went on to tell this story.
Yes, certainly, Miki and Jacky and Sibabalwe, thank you for your kind comments, and I'm so glad that you guys enjoyed the film. So yeah, just to give you some backstory on how Fashion Reimagined came to be. So the film took 5 years to make. So if we go back to 2017, I was working for a production company in London called Duck Productions. And Duck specializes in creating short video content for fashion brands. So I was working on campaigns for big designers and doing a lot of content around events like London Fashion Week. And one of my assignments for Duck Productions was to create a short film around the Vogue Designer Fashion Fund, which is an award given every year in the UK to the top emerging designer. And so the winner that year in 2017 was Amy Powney for Mother of Pearl. And so I went and filmed her winning the award, and we did some filming at her house. And there's a cash prize that goes along with that award. And so I asked her at her house in her living room what she was going to do with that money and what was next in her career. And she told me that she was going to take this money and go on a mission to create a sustainable collection from field to finished garment. So she wanted to meet the sheep that were in her wool. She wanted to meet the people that picked her cotton. And that was just such a light bulb moment for me. As I mentioned, I had been on my own sustainability journey for several years and had made changes in my personal life. But by 2017 was feeling very restless and wanting to do something that could potentially have a bigger impact in terms of the environmental issues that I cared about. At the same time, you know, just as a filmmaker, I was wanting to do my first feature film and was in the back of my mind, like looking for that story. And so it was really just a perfect storm when I met Amy and she told me about this mission and she was about to go to Uruguay, and I could just see it. And I knew that I had to follow her on that journey. And what an interesting way into climate change and, you know, the environmental crisis than fashion. Because there are a lot of amazing environmental documentaries out there, but sometimes kind of the imagery that we are presented with can feel very remote for people, you know, lonely polar bears and ice caps melting and wildfires, unfortunately less familiar in Europe, more familiar in Europe now, but we all wear clothes. So I got really, really excited about that idea and just knew that I had to follow the story. And so that's how it began.
I think now's a perfect time to share the trailer, Daryl, if we could do that. And I'm also going to ask, in case the play of the trailer isn't clear on the Zoom, we can just drop it in the chat as well if people want to just take 2 minutes to watch the trailer, because I think some of our festival goers have seen the film in Cape Town, but it hasn't screened in Joburg yet. And there are people joining from other provinces who haven't seen the film. So it's good to just have a quick look before we carry on. I hope you could follow that. I know it's a little bit jittery on the Zoom. Such a lovely trailer, Becky.
Thank you.
I'm going to pick up on that issue of, it's not as simple as just saying, I'm going to go and use sustainably sourced fabrics to make my, I want to live differently. I want to be different. I want to put a different product out there. But the system is designed to make it so hard to do that. And I think that's what's really interesting in the film, is like you see this like constant pushing as she's going through the various layers. And so it's fine for me to make a decision to only, I'm only going to wear recycled clothes or sustainably sourced clothing for the rest of my life, but that's not going to necessarily change the system. And you've acknowledged that in your impact campaign, where you've got the sort of very personal, what can each person who walks out of here do, but you also have a systemic approach. You want to shift something. So maybe just talk us through your campaign strategy from that very individual to that big picture.
Yes. Yeah, no, exactly. So, I mean, I specifically wanted for the film to follow one designer's journey, in the hopes that, through narrative and through this very compelling character and the characters around her, that people come on board with this issue, like in a very organic way, and that hopefully there would be an emotional response to the film, to Amy's journey, to Amy's character. And I specifically wanted that approach versus like a more issue-based approach where I interview lots of different people, which was like, suggested to me at different points. But I really didn't want to go that way. I really wanted to follow one character, because I felt like that was a really good way to get people on board with this issue and to get attached emotionally to this issue. However, you're completely right, Miki. Obviously, she is one designer, this is one small brand, and we're looking at a much bigger picture, and we do need systemic change. And so in terms of our approach with the impact campaign, I mean, I will say, as we were developing the strategy for the impact campaign, we kept getting told, like, you need to have one small, specific, achievable goal for your campaign. And like, I just couldn't whittle it down to that, because there are so many stakeholders in this issue. It was just too hard. It was too hard to concentrate on one small thing. And so we have like a very multi-pronged strategy that addresses, so there's the government side of things. We need legislation. There's an education component. There's, the citizens, public facing component. What can each individual do? And then there's the industry facing component of the campaign. So I'll talk you through like each section of the campaign, if that's okay. So on the legislative side, it's actually quite amazing, our timing with the film, because the whole time I was making the film, it was just taking so long, like 5 years, and then another year after we had our festival premiere. We had our festival premiere last June. It's just like so long after that for the film to be released, and will this even be relevant? And lo and behold, like, we've landed here in 2023, where there are incredible things happening on the policy front. So in particular in the EU and the US, There are amazing things happening in policy. In the EU, a few weeks ago, we screened our film for EU MPs in Brussels ahead of a historic vote on two pieces of legislation. One is called the Corporate Due Diligence Directive, and that requires companies in different sectors to report on various environmental impacts and like labor conditions in their supply chains. And then there's something else called the EU Strategy for Sustainable and Circular Textiles, which is not legislation as of yet, but it's a very holistic strategy. It's very, very long, suggesting all kinds of things like having a digital product passport for every fashion product that's sold in the EU market. So if customers go on a website, they're about to make a purchase, they would clearly be able to see like the water footprint of that product, the carbon emissions of that product, how much people were paid to make that product, etc. There are suggestions for something called an extended producer responsibility scheme, where fashion brands selling within the EU would be responsible for the entire life cycle of their product from raw material through to disposal, and would need to have a plan in place for how they are either recycling or reusing their product at end of life, and on and on and on. So we were able 2 days ahead of this vote to present our film to MPs, and lo and behold, I mean, I don't know if we actually, played a role in swaying the vote at all, but amazingly, 2 days later, both pieces of legislation went ahead. The vote was overwhelmingly in favor of both of these pieces of legislation. In the case of the EU strategy, that will now go back to the Commission to be developed further. So the vote was to say, yes, we want this to be developed into law. So that is incredible. And we have plans to do some kind of UK policy event. It will look very, very different in the UK, which is super behind the EU and sadly not part of the EU, which is a whole other story. But, hopefully doing something for policymakers, at least to get the conversation started in the UK, and then funding dependent, it would be amazing to do something in the US as well. So that's kind of the legislative side of the campaign. The education side, I'm super, super excited about, because we've done several screenings for students already, which have been some of my favorite screenings. I mean, just that generation is so savvy about climate change already. They learn about it in school. They are going to be the most affected by it, and are really just very, very open to the ideas in the film. And, just from having interns working on our film throughout the process, they've brought so much energy to the project. We've had like young fashion students work on the film for a few months and then run back to their friends at fashion school, and they all end up doing like sustainable collections as their graduate thesis project. So that's been really, really cool to see, and I'm excited to do more work in that space. So we have partnered with an organization called Graduate Fashion Foundation, which represents, I think, 80 universities across the UK and globally, which all have fashion courses. And so we will be doing a screening tour across the UK at different universities. And the idea is to integrate the film into curriculums in these various fashion courses, so that these programs can use the film as a tool to help students kind of solidify what they're learning about sustainability, to help provide some inspiration for fashion students. And I will attend these screenings, and hopefully Amy will be able to attend some of them. So really, really excited about that. And then like on the public facing side, we have a social campaign. So we post almost daily. It's mainly through Instagram. And an amazing thing that we were able to do there is for those of you who have seen the film, you know, Amy had a campaign herself, Amy the designer, and that campaign has since finished, but it still had this Instagram page with like 7,500 followers. So Amy kindly kind of allowed us to convert that Instagram page into our Fashion Reimagined homepage, and then we've been able to grow our audience from there. So we're at like 10,500 plus followers, and we're posting in, you know, stuff about the film, screenings, but also like graphic assets, that sharing stats, sharing facts, sharing news, industry news. So that's a way that we're communicating. We're also doing a lot of community screenings, often partnering with local organizations, doing clothing swaps at our screenings, you know, inviting local designers to a display at the screening. I live in a village in southwest England. And so for this screening, we partnered with an organization called Plastic Free North Devon, which runs repair cafes monthly just down the street from me, where it's a team of volunteer seamstresses who, like, you go in, you take in your clothes that need repairs. So, you know, they may be missing a button or the hem has come down, and you take your clothes in and they'll just repair it for you. It's running for a few hours. You sit, you have coffee, you have cake, you hang out with people. And it was a really great way by partnering with this organization to like plug the repair cafes and build community around that. And now I'm going monthly, and it's people who've seen the film, people have told their friends about the film. I have finally learned how to sew a button, which I did just a few weeks ago. So it's been really amazing to like see the effects firsthand just in my own community of, you know, I don't know, just being able to see that impact firsthand on your doorstep has been really, really cool. And then the final side is the industry side. So we have partnered with a few key organizations in the fashion industry, including the British Fashion Council. And that has allowed us to access high-level people in the fashion industry. So something key that we did with them is ahead of our theatrical release in the UK, we launched our film the opening night of London Fashion Week in February. And we screened the film. It was sold out. We screened the film for like 150 high-level people in the fashion industry. So editors, buyers, designers, you know, people from brands. And that was an amazing success. And we got a lot of coverage off of the back of that in top fashion magazines. So it's been really, really key working with the British Fashion Council, and we've done several events with them, and we'll continue to work with them. So those are kind of some of the key components of our impact campaign.
Thanks, Becky. I think just to summarize there, you spoke about the legislative, the educational, the social campaign through the Instagram account, and then industry. And this is a very, very well structured, very well thought through campaign. And you obviously put a lot of work with the team into developing those impact goals. But I think what's often interesting with a film is that especially a film that has got an impact campaign, there's a lot of things that happen that you don't have control over, that you didn't plan, that are these surprise impacts. And I'd love to hear from Jacky and Sibabalwe. Maybe Jacky, I can start with you. This film, for example, can you see a space for this in the work that you do in South Africa? And if so, how?
I think it's a beautiful story, and there's a lot of work going on in South Africa around shortening supply chains and creating vertical supply chains. In fact, this week we launched on Monday last week, the first fully vertically integrated jumper was launched in one of our retailers. And it's sold out in one of the stores in Johannesburg, which is incredible. It was a hand-dyed knitwear, beautiful jumper. So those are all issues that designers and retailers, not all of the retailers, but some retailers and brands are grappling with here. For instance, you can't get organic cotton in South Africa. You go really cotton. So I see a lot of scope for this film. In fact, I would love to show it before we host our African Textile Talk in August, and I think students should see it. And the only hesitation I have is that it's a global North story, which is incredibly different creation context to ours. There's so many other dynamics in the South African in the South African context. So that'll be my only hesitation. But the beautiful storytelling around that vertical supply chain and the kind of very careful interrogation into the materials that Amy and Chloe did was really beautiful. And I think it sets a fantastic example for designers and brands and retailers.
Sibabalwe, as a creator of fabric, as a textile designer, are there aspects of the film that you can relate to, those kind of barriers? And obviously, just picking up on what Jacky said now, the context here is very different to the context that Amy's taking us through in her journey. How do you relate to the story as somebody who's on a similar kind of journey, not exactly the same, but you're trying to break those barriers as well in this context?
There are so many points in the film that that can connect, to a designer's journey here in South Africa. But I think the journey of having to persist in engaging with all these different stakeholders, right? So I know in approaching farmers, it really helps to start building relationship with them, for them to understand what essentially the value that designers bring, but also understanding that there is a cost factor, right? I think it was really tough. I think there's still a lot of issues that I think make it very difficult to connect with production and sort of how it is, how we're not all on one accord, right? But moving towards sustainability. I think it's the cost and time factor really is a factor. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
No, would you like to respond to any of that, Becky?
Yeah, sure. Sibabalwe, I wonder if, one of the issues that you encounter, which certainly Amy and Chloe came up against time and again, as, working for a small brand, is that they just didn't have the buying power. So unless they met like-minded people along the way who were just on the same page as them, it just wasn't worth it for factories or farmers to do things differently, to do things more sustainably, just for them, just for their tiny orders. It would be much easier for a large brand to come in and say, we will order 1,000 pieces if you do it this way. Then now you're talking, then many more suppliers will come on board. But often it was just a matter of, the orders weren't big enough for suppliers to be willing to do what Amy and Chloe wanted them to do. And it ends up being it almost, I don't want to give too much away in the film for those who haven't seen it, but that issue almost like completely derails the whole thing.
Yeah.
I do want to say is that it requires persistence, but a lot of collaboration. So I think my struggle has been about getting everyone on board when it comes to it can't just be designers and farmers, and it really needs to move towards one voice around sustainability. And so I mean, currently where I'm at, there's a lot of frustration, but I drew a lot of inspiration through Amy's persistence and how she stuck to her guns, as challenging as it was. So I found the campaign so great.
I think what I'm hearing there, Sibabalwe, sorry, your sound has just suddenly dipped out. Sibabalwe.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
What I was hearing there was just about the need for legislation. Like it's a difficult battle to fight on your own, and I think that's where your impact campaign has been so powerful. Is that you've taken this multi-prong approach, and I just want to pick up on what some of the comments coming through on the chat. I see Anita Kana, who's also a co-director of Climate Story Lab, has said, "I'm sure the screening the films to MPs in Brussels made a difference to the EU vote. Well done to even get the film in front of this audience." I mean, that is such a win. That is such an incredible win. Yeah. Absolutely. Liani says, "I loved watching this film. Compelling story, beautifully told. The quest you show in the film for a way to make a sustainable collection could have gone one of many ways. How do you think the impact potential of the film would have been different if they failed and didn't, okay, well, there's a spoiler alert, and didn't manage to produce a collection? Were you or the mother of Pearl team reluctant to show the compromise that had to be made along the way?"
Yeah, great questions. So if the mission had failed, and of course, success can be measured different ways, and even when a collection is made quote unquote sustainably, like it always has an impact. But yeah, no, if they had completely failed, I believed Amy is such a compelling character, and as you said, Sibabalwe, so persistent, that even if it had failed, I think we would have gotten a great film out of it. And the whole concept of like sharing information about the environmental and social impact of the fashion industry as Amy and her close colleague Chloe learn about it, I still probably would have taken that approach. And so I think there still would hopefully have been a lot of value in the film. Of course, it would have been more bittersweet. But to be fair, there were many versions of the film, even with the success, because it still is bittersweet. This is still a massive, complicated issue. And so, I would hope that it would still have a positive impact, no matter what the outcome of the actual narrative. And then, was I reluctant to show the compromise? Yes, there were very, very tricky moments in the edit. It was a very long edit. It was a full-time 18-month edit on this film that almost drove me insane. And yeah, I mean, one thing that was particularly difficult, I don't want to give away spoilers, but yeah, it is hard. It is hard to share the compromises, but in the interest of transparency, that's the whole point. That's one of the pillars of this collection. That's one of Amy's biggest values, is transparency. We had to do it. And whether it's, audience trust or the trust of your customers, like you have to be transparent if you want to earn people's trust. And I wanted to show the reality of the situation. And yeah, Amy started out this mission with a set of values, with a set of goals for this collection. And unfortunately, she realized that, you know, for her first collection, she wasn't able to hit absolutely every single one, but there are the realities of deadlines and of, you know, just coming up against barriers that you can't overcome right then and there. But what are you supposed to do? You can either give up, or you can either put out, you know, you can get to a certain point, and then you can put something out there with the view that you're going to continue the journey for the next one, the next one, the next one, which is what she's done. And she's just evolved and evolved and evolved. And so yeah, it was hard to narratively figure out a way to share those compromises in the right way. But I think it was very important that we do that.
Becky, as a filmmaker, also currently in post-production, I'm simultaneously jealous and very sorry for you that you were in the edit for 18 months. But out came an incredible film. So well done for persisting.
Thanks. I totally understand the envy and the jealousy.
I know your pain. I know your pain.
Yeah.
I just want to encourage people, if they have comments or questions, please drop them in the Q&A, and also to Jacky and Sibabalwe, if there's anything that Becky says that sparks, just alert me to the fact that you'd like to jump in. I'm just going to also share some of the other comments. Anita said, I found Amy's personal story very inspiring. It took a woman from a working class background to come along and disrupt an industry that's quite exclusive. And it speaks to how one determined person who is able to find some good partners and allies can really begin to shift things. I so agree with that. She's so, you know, Amy is powerful, but she's not hesitant to show her vulnerability. And I think that's really inspiring.
Thank you so much for those comments, Anita. I appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, I think that's like, besides the fact that we all wear clothes, I think that's the universal part of this story, is that, you know, if Amy can do it, someone who grew up off grid in the middle of England with no money and no connections, took the fashion world by storm, and then, you know, created change within that industry, then, you know, we can all have influence in our own surroundings. We can all make change in our own ways.
I see another comment from Liani saying, amazing impact campaign from the continental to the hyper local. The fashion school student screening tour is genius. Are there any plans to roll this out in fashion schools in Africa and do screenings with non-fashion students, i.e. consumers? Maybe this is also something that Sibabalwe and Jacky will want to take up and wave the flag going forward. We'd love people to see this film here.
I would absolutely love it too. And Jacky and Sibabalwe, please, you know, speak up and let me know if there's any interest there. But yeah, you know, it's one of the challenges with this impact campaign is like not being able to do absolutely everything that you want to do. And we get a phenomenal amount of requests for screenings that we can't facilitate, and like wonderful ideas. And it's just like, oh, you know, a lot of it comes down to funding. But yeah, if there are avenues and like ways to fund screenings in Africa, like I would absolutely love that. We've had some really interesting ideas come through in the past little while. One, the idea of screening for costume departments in film and TV, which is a very wasteful industry in itself, and like something that I wasn't thinking about when I was coming up with the strategies. That's one area where I'm like, oh my gosh, like how can we find the resources to do that? I think that would be really, really cool. And then I've had a few people from the sportswear side of things approach me, which is really, really interesting too, because that conversation is like only at the very, very beginning in the area of sportswear. So my point being, like, there's all these incredible ideas and like ways that we can have impact. And I'm just like, you know, if there's a way to fund it, if there's people that are interested in helping us in these different areas and in Africa, like amazing. I would love to do it.
I'd love to. I'm painfully aware of time, which has run out so quickly. But what an incredible conversation we've had. And I'd love to call on each of the panelists to maybe just share a closing reflection or a closing statement before we end the session. Jacky, can I start with you? I'll bring it down on my screen to Sibabalwe and then across to Becky.
Few things that I want you to say. I mean, firstly, I would love to collaborate on another screening if possible, but I'll be in touch with you. The two things I'm doing in my research that I'm doing now, I mean, obviously costs and the kind of unlocking of a cost, the costing and where the value really lies with fashion. And I think that's what was really interesting with Amy, that direct to consumer model. I mean, also so when people use that for retailers, there's a lot of direct to consumers. But in South Africa, we have a we're speaking a lot about value retail. And the value retail is very, very challenging. So 90% of our consumers would be considered value consumers who, are earning very little money at the retail, right? So affordable. As you know, affordable.
Jacky, I'm so sorry. Your audio, Jacky, your audio has deteriorated since the beginning, and now I don't know if Becky can hear you, but I absolutely can't. No. Okay, maybe you can just type your comment and then I'll share it. Or okay, Sibabalwe.
Can you hear me? Yeah,
loud and clear.
I mean, my takeaway from the film, I felt like it was not only personal but also accessible for almost anyone. You don't have to be in the fashion industry to be able to understand how important it is for us to shift and think about how to make our system of production on consuming more sustainable and more just healthier for our planet and ourselves. And so it would be great if there could be a space for everyone to be involved and also just to see this film and use it in some way as a roadmap, as a guide to even work backwards on how to problem solve, and the fact that it was done on a luxury scale and platform, I think also helps bring the issue and the conversation forward as well in a really practical way. I think that was my takeaway.
I see what Jacky says. She was trying to say was that value fashion is often equals synthetics, which is something that you draw attention to in the film very strongly. Becky, can I have a final thought from you?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I love Sibabalwe's idea of making this film accessible in some way. I need to think about that to, anyone in the fashion world trying to make this journey, making it accessible to students. Let me think about that, because that is a really good idea. And in fact, we have had several fashion brands, some really surprising, huge fast fashion brands, luxury brands contact us, and we're doing screenings for them. Some have official departments, sustainability departments, where they're in the process of making a green transition and they want to use our film as part of that transition, show all of their staff, which is really, really exciting. But yeah, if there was like a more a broader way to make this accessible to anyone who wants it, that would be really cool. And then, people often ask me what they can do just on an individual level, like right after this film, maybe to after they've seen the film, to make a difference. And so what I've been telling people is, before they make their next purchase, ask themselves three questions. I got this from Amy, which is, do I really need this? do I really love this? And am I going to keep this for years to come? And I think just by, asking yourself those 3 questions, maybe if you see something you like, sitting on it, thinking about it for a few days, or in my case, for a year. I take a long, long time before I buy anything new. I think that can help all of us collectively to buy less and better, and to love our wardrobes more, and to want to keep what we've bought more, because we've really thought about, whether we want that item in our lives.
That's a fantastic closing thought and a great takeaway. I know Encounters is going to be mad at me about running over time, but there is a lovely comment here from Antonia Porti, who says, what an amazing discussion. Please share if you'll be screening the film again. Yes, I was going to close the session by saying, if you are in Johannesburg, you can see the film on the 1st of July at 5 o'clock. And I must just double check which venue is that. The Zone Cinema Nouveau. So it has already screened in Cape Town. In Joburg, you can still screen it. And I'm hoping that we can take this conversation with Becky further to have some impact screenings in South Africa. There are outlets like Doc Love, some of the universities, I'm sure would love to screen it, the fashion schools. So hopefully we can keep that conversation going. Antonia also says, not sure if it's relevant, but curious for any of your thoughts on collaborations of sustainable brands with fast fashion brands, example H&M, and if it's a good idea or ever really possible without compromising sustainable principles. How do we make this meaningful?
Okay, do we have time to answer that one?
Try.
Okay, yeah, no, it's an interesting one, because, during the time that we filmed Fashion Reimagined, there was suddenly an explosion of awareness. Mainstream media was all of a sudden covering the issue of fashion's environmental impact. And so there was suddenly pressure on fashion brands to at least be seen to making a change. And then all of a sudden, these fast fashion brands were coming out with conscious lines, sustainable lines, which, on one hand can be seen as positive, but in reality, these lines usually represent like 0.01% of their output, but they put a ton of marketing money behind it to make customers believe that that is the path that they're heading down. But I kind of see it as a distraction that allows them to continue business as usual, which is pumping out huge volumes of product made of cheap synthetic fabrics that are built on, labor exploitation. So, better to buy a sustainably made garment from a fast fashion brand than not, but it's really not solving the much, much bigger issue. And overproduction is like the big elephant in the room. Even if we made everything sustainably, if we're making clothes at the current rate, which is like 150 billion garments a year, even if they're all sustainable processes, we'll have a huge, huge problem. So we need to degrowth is a big conversation in the sustainable fashion space. We need to be producing much less and looking at more circular models.
Absolutely. Yes, for degrowth. Jackie's dying to say something.
So exactly, that's the big problem. The degrowth conversation in the global south in South Africa, where we've got 40% unemployment rate, is the tricky part of this whole conversation in South Africa. I mean, how do we degrow and be sustainable at the same time? I just like, it's the big thing in mind. It's what keeps me awake at night.
Yeah.
Degrowing a shrinking economy. Well, it's like, what are we growing and what are we shrinking? Maybe that's the question. Okay, yeah. I see it is 4 o'clock and I am going to have to close. What a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much, Jacky. Thank you, Sibabalwe, Becky. A great honor to have you here. I hope everybody gets to see this film. And I do want to also remind everybody in the room, not just the panelists, but everybody out there watching the session, that the Climate Story Lab is hosting another webinar tomorrow with Shaunak Sen, the director of All That Breathes, a beautiful film. I think it's going to be an incredible conversation. So please join us for that one as well. And a huge thank you to all of you. It's been wonderful talking to you.
Thank you so much for having us, MIKI.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank
Have a
you.
lovely evening. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Care.
Thank you.